Slog FPV. If you're familiar with my channel, you know I have a super soft spot for 1S and 2S whoops, mainly because they are beginner friendly, safe to fly both indoors and outdoors, sub 250 grams, not loud, and over the past few years have incorporated digital HT systems in these tiny platforms. In my mind, the company that has led the analog to HD whoop transition is HDZero. I already did a video on upgrading an analog toothpick using HDZero's all-in-one 15 board. It's a 15 amp board, linked below. And today we are looking at the HDZero M8 Freestyle Maiden Flight that is a collaboration between HDZero and Happymodel. In the box you get the quad itself, and I can tell you already I'm impressed with the frame. It is fairly thick, and it does have some give, but I think it's thick enough that it could take a substantial hit and survive. So just wanted to point that out. You do have the camera exposed here, so you possibly could print out a canopy if you wanted to give the camera a little more protection, but we'll talk about that in the review. You also get a bag of parts. You get the programming dongle, you get a wire harness, you get a prop removal tool, you get some spare props, a spare canopy, a screwdriver, and then you get a set of, there's some spare screws in here in case you lose those out of the frame. You get some stickers. And another thing I wanted to point out is the foam in the box is something that you typically don't see. It's more like the foam you would see in a hard case for a cine whoop. So I'll probably print out a box out of PLA or something and put this foam insert, because this will be great for storing the quad itself. And then it has this nice little area here, plenty of room for a couple of batteries. Quickly going through the specs, the star of the show is the HDZero all-in-one 15 board, which includes everything you need as far as electronics, minus the camera. So I think HDZero, as far as I know, is the only company that is actually, selling something that has both the Express LRS, all the ESCs, and the VTX all on one single board, which again is pretty amazing. The camera is the Lux camera, which I think is an excellent camera for freestyle. It's low latency, of course. The motors, it's hard to see here, but they're the RS 1102 13,500 kV motors. The props are 45 millimeter props. The battery pigtail is an XT30. The battery bay here supports, they recommend a 550 milliamp hour 2S battery. The wheelbase is 80 millimeters motor post to motor post. The overall weight, I measured 33 grams. I'll flash it up here on the screen, and they say it's less than 33.5, so they were accurate in what they're claiming the overall weight minus the battery is. So those are the high-level overview of the quad itself as far as the specifications. So next I'm going to go ahead and plug this thing into Beta Flight. You can see that the battery, or I should say the wire harness for the programming dongle is plugged into here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and then with the USB-C dongle to my computer and configure things in Beta Flight. Well, the first thing that happened when I plugged in the Mobula 8 into my computer and fired up the Beta Flight configurator released version of the configurator, which is 10.10.0, I got this warning message saying that it's not compatible with 4.6.0, which actually is not a version that's even released yet. So I think that's going to be a problem for new pilots. It's going to be confusing. There is an online version of the Beta Flight configurator that will support this particular firmware release. but in actuality, the 4.6.0 release is never going to be a official release. Beta Flight devs have gone to a different naming convention. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the web-based version of the Beta Flight configurator. It's a PWA, which stands for Progressive Web Application. And we'll have to use that to configure this quad if we want to make any changes. So I'm going to go there next. Loading the online Betaflight configurator is very easy. You just go to app.betaflight.com and it'll bring up this window here. If you don't see the COM port, all you need to do is go to this pull down menu and select I can't find my USB device. It'll pop up a secondary window, and in this case it comes up as Betaflight STM32G47X, and you hit connect, and then connect. So now you're in the quad model tabs here. So if you're a new pilot and you're not comfortable with the Betaflight configurator, I would not make any changes whatsoever. I just want you to know that you'll need to set up your radio appropriately. Going first to the modes tab, aux1 you have to have set as the ARM channel per Express LRS. That's the only way it's going to, Express LRS will recognize that your quad is armed. And this is the factory defaults here. The only thing that's kind of strange with the factory defaults is the mode selection, angle, horizon, and acro are on aux4. A lot of times, typically with Happymodel, you see that on aux2. So you're going to have to select a 3-position switch on your radio and configure that switch as aux4 for your mode selection. Then flip over on crash is aux2. The other thing you need to make sure that your radio is set up for, going to the receiver tab, you'll notice over here in the channel mapping, this needs to be AETR1234 on your radio as well. Otherwise you're going to have to change this order if you don't want to change your radio. I would say like Radio Master, like pockets are set up default AETR, aux1, aux2, aux3, aux4, so that's pretty common. Okay, so this is actually the second time I've recorded this section of the video. The main issue being the 4.6.0 version of Betaflight firmware is not compatible with the latest version of the online configurator that I have at the time of this video. So I actually went ahead and updated the target to the latest version for the HDZero AIO15 all-in-one board, and then that solved a lot of the strange behavior I was getting. I literally was having issues where I would change things in the configuration tab, like the arming angle, and it would literally change the accelerometer settings. So keep that in mind. I would definitely upgrade. The other option, if you want to be more conservative, is to go back to 4.5.2, which is the latest version at the time of this video recording that's released, and then just go back to the basically the standalone application versus the online version because of the issues I was having. So quickly going through the changes I made from the factory defaults. If you're a more experienced pilot and have used the Betaflight configurator, on the setup page, I already have calibrated this accelerometer, but it was slightly off. So if you're going to be flying in angle mode, you definitely want to recalibrate your model by putting it on a flat surface and hit calibrate accelerometer. Ports tab, everything is set up there correctly. Configuration tab, again, I wanted to change the arming angle to 180 degrees. If you're a more experienced pilot, you know that that allows you to arm your model when it gets caught in a tree. Hopefully you can blip the throttle and get it released from getting stuck. I did turn air mode off. I moved that to a switch, so that's only on when I'm in acro mode. and we'll get into that a little later as to why I do that. Then we have, they didn't have RX lost and RX set for a D-shot beacon. This thing doesn't have a buzzer, so I felt like these are larger motors. It's not super loud, but at least if you're close by, you can hear the model. This thing's, because of its dark color, is definitely easy to get lost if you're out in the field. And then just set the RX lost as far as the beeper configuration, and the RX set so that when I have an aux channel set up in the modes tab where I can use B-shot beacon to find the model. Power and battery, everything fine there. Failsafe, everything fine there. Nothing on presets other than highly recommend saving a backup of the factory defaults so that you can go back to it if you run into problems. PID tuning, I didn't make any changes here other than changing the rate profile settings, which is a personal preference. For angle mode, I like flying with a linear curve here. Also, they had a throttle expo, and then they changed the throttle midpoint. I went back to the more standard Maiden Flight configurations with the throttle mid at 0.5 and the hover point at 0.5. I typically just fly with a linear throttle curve. Or, that's not a curve at all, just linear. And for rate profile 2, I wanted to try their settings. It looked interesting to me, and see for a new pilot, does this throttle expo to smooth out the throttle response, and they did change the throttle mid to 0.24. Does that help to where this is a light model, so it does have a lot of thrust to weight ratio, so it's a powerful model for a whoop with a larger motor and being 2S, so I get why they did that. So I can give you my feelings on that. I did take this out for its maiden, and I'll get into that later in the video. Rate profile 3 is my acro rates, again personal preference, and again going back to a linear throttle curve, which I always fly with. Receiver tab, nothing there other than changing the stick low threshold and the stick high threshold just to get me some more fidelity. This was at the default, so I usually do that. I changed this down to 1010 and this up to 1990, and again that gives you more throttle resolution. Modes tab, okay, this is where I made quite a bit of changes. AUX1 of course stayed the same. That has to be on AUX1 channel for ARM. It's a requirement for Express LRS. They had AUX4, which I thought was very strange for the mode switch. I'm not sure why that is. If you guys can think of anything, let me know in the comments. Typically, even Happymodel uses AUX2. Again, there's no real true standard other than AUX1 has to be ARM. This is my basic setup. Again, personal preference that the mode have a 3-position mode switch on my Radiomaster Pocket that I use for selecting angle, horizon, or acro/air. And you can see here I put air mode on a switch here. And then flip over on crash is AUX3, as well as the beeper is also on AUX3. It's a 3-position switch. So those are the only changes I made on the modes tab. Adjustments. I like having, depending on what flight mode I'm in, my rate profile change. So how I do that, of course, is pretty standard. You set this to max on each side. You change, if enabled, when channel AUX2 is set, you're going to be selecting the rate profile via aux channel 2. And so when I'm going back to the PID tuning tab, if I'm in acro mode, I have a linear curve here. If I'm in horizon, then I'm going to have this curve, and then if I'm in acro, I'm going to have my normal acro rates. So I don't have to have a separate 3-position switch to do that. Going on to GPS, didn't do anything there. Motors tab, I put motor stop on, reason being if you fly this model indoors, it's very powerful. So when the props are spinning, you're going to be sucking up dust bunnies when your throttle's all the way down. You know, I don't have a perfectly clean house. That's one issue. The other, and it gets tangled up in the motors, and I have dogs. So I usually, to avoid dog hair and stuff, I usually put my switch on or I should say motor stop, based off of whether or not I'm flying an acro or not, which I don't fly acro typically indoors because my house is fairly small. I usually fly an angle. So point being here is I put motor stop on, and then another thing that it prevents is walls. A lot of times if you're flying and you crash into a wall and you have a lighter model like this and the props are still spinning, you can get sucked into the wall. And so again, I turn motor stop on when I'm in angle and horizon. Enough on that. OSD, another personal preference. It was a little busier for the factory defaults. These are just my settings. So really nothing too exciting there. Video transmitter, I went ahead and changed this to channel 8. It gets me away from the Wi-Fi channels I have in my house. And again, you can set that, of course, through your goggles if you're out in the field. So next I'm going to go over my maiden flight with you and what my thoughts are on this model, and we'll do that next. Here are my thoughts on the Happymodel M8 Freestyle HD and whether or not I'm happy with my purchase. Let's start with the pros, and that being performance. Due to its lightweight at 33 grams and that it's running on 2S, the thrust to weight ratio is very high on this model. It is very fast for a large form factor whoop, significantly faster than, let's say, the Beta FPV Meteor 75 Pro here that is running on 1S and is heavier at 38 grams. I mean, you're really comparing apples to oranges here. They're really for different applications. So let's move on to flight characteristics. I was very pleased and surprised that the tune was as good as it was at my altitude at 5,000 feet. It's really hit or miss for me when it comes to factory tunes at my altitude, but with the 530 milliamp hour battery, the tune was great. Very minimal prop wash with using just light whoop acro. The punch outs are amazing, which can be a con indoors. Unlike the Meteor 75, which is way more sedate, this quad really is not intended, in my humble opinion, for flying indoors. It's rather designed for an outdoor park flyer. You know, I'm not saying that you can't fly this thing slow with good throttle management, but indoors I think it's just way too powerful for what somebody would want to have indoors. That's just my opinion. Not saying that you can't fly it in a larger building or something like that, but in a small house, you're better off with a smaller whoop. So that segues into the throttle expo that I was showing you in the factory default. I flew the rates with the throttle expo and just to see if it would be good for new pilots. You know, I'm not a purist who would say you are learning bad muscle memory habits. Throttle management is generally something that new pilots struggle with, and whatever gets them into the air to have fun, enjoy the hobby, I'm okay with it. You know, however, in my humble opinion, you should learn to fly with linear throttle curves at some point, especially if you want to race or do technical freestyle. Another point to make is throttle curves with proper midpoint and hover point adjustments does have its place. If you're a professional doing cine whoop real estate videos, the new throttle settings should help you with your videos at being more consistent as far as the height level, kind of like a dolly as you fly between rooms. And this model isn't intended for that type of application. I'm talking, professional cine whoops that might be running the DJI A04 Pro air unit. So point being is, yes, throttle curves and the new Beta Flight configuration, hover point and midpoint throttle adjustments with expos do have their place, is the point. Moving on to battery selection. Again, the sweet spot for me was the GNB 530 milliamp hour 2S battery, followed by the GNB 550 milliamp hour 2S battery. The 450 milliamp hour battery just wasn't getting the flight time, and so it wasn't really that much lighter than the 530. So as far as the 720, one of the downfalls of and we'll get into the cons, it won't fit into this battery tray, so I couldn't test that battery out. But as far as flight times, with the GNB 530, I was getting a good 6 minutes worth of flight with mixed acro in cruising, mixed in, and 6 minutes, 15 seconds approximately with the 550 milliamp hour battery. So really respectable flight time for this, which I think is a pro. Another pro is the noise level. Like a lot of ultralight whoops, it's quiet enough to not be a nuisance in a park. So nobody's going to notice this little guy. I mean, it's bigger than a normal whoop, but because it's very light, it doesn't make a lot of prop noise. So nobody's going to be paying attention to this guy. Moving on to the camera and VTX. I like the fixed camera angle. You can see here at 15 degrees. I think it's new pilot friendly, and it's good for cruising and slow whoop acro. So I think they did pick a good angle. I also like that they added these struts for added protection. And overall, I'm pleased with the canopy as far as the camera angle and having this strut here. But it is very exposed, so we'll get into the cons, my concerns with that. Also, although it's good for an HDZero camera, it's not as good, obviously, as a DJI A04 system that's like on the Meteor 75 HD Pro. Overall, I thought that the color and detail in the video feed is much better than analog. So if you're already in the HDZero ecosystem, I think this is a real good camera and setup. Except for the more exposed camera, the durability of this whoop is great for park flying crashes. You know, not something that you would have in a bando, but for park flying, I think this thing is very durable with the prop guards and the durability of the frame itself. I didn't have any cracks in the struts here, and the prop protection on here held up quite well. This is really tough plastic here. So also this model is really lightweight at 33 grams dry, so that helps out as well. It pretty much bounces off of things. Another pro is the value. Meteor 75 Pro in at $289.99 US. That's significantly more expensive than this M8. That will set you back $249.99. Still expensive, but on par or cheaper than, let's say, the Walksnail and DJI competition. So overall, I think it's a good value. Now let's move on to the cons. So I'm going to rant a little bit. The out-of-box experience was, I think, bad for this particular model. I'm not sure who to blame. Happymodel probably, since they built the product, but it was a huge mistake for them to release this model with the Maiden Flight 4.6.0 pre-release firmware. It's not compatible, like I stated, with a new online configurator, and it's also not compatible with the older 10.10.0 standalone configurator. So I think for a new pilot that's going to be very frustrating, because it was frustrating for me. Another con is the factory defaults with the modes being on aux channel 4 are not really consistent with other Happymodel quads that use aux 2. Maybe that's a niggle for more experienced pilots, but I think it's going to be confusing for new pilots. Not a showstopper, but the camera again is fairly exposed. You know, with these struts, I think that helps things out. There is a wrap around the lens, so it is fairly durable. But of course, I know why they did it this way, is to reduce weight. Then also the camera angle cannot be adjusted with this setup. Also maybe a niggle is, and it's common with a lot of whoops with these battery trays, the battery selection is very limited. I already mentioned I was able to fit these 3 batteries in, but larger batteries like this 720 milliamp hour battery just won't fit in the battery tray. So keep that in mind. And then the last con I would like to mention is the video range was not the best with the small whoop bipole antenna. I do like that they put a little holder here for it. I did stick it up in the air so I could get better reception. The range on this thing wasn't super great, and I'll probably switch this out for the lightweight ORT antenna. That's a little better antenna. And that's about all the cons I can think of off the top of my head. So in conclusion, am I happy with my purchase? I would say absolutely yes, even with the Maiden Flight configuration compatibility issue. I think the frame, that is very robust. The Express LRS control link is great. The HDZero video link, detail, color is great as compared to analog. The flight performance, the low noise, the flight time, the great motor selection, and its sub 40 gram dry weight makes it a great addition for those who like to fly in open fields and parks like myself. This is where the rub is. Do I think this is a good pick for a new pilot? I think if they just would have loaded 4.5.2, I would have given this a strong thumbs up for a new pilot. Because in my humble opinion, where do you learn to fly FPV? Yeah, you can spend time on a simulator, but flying in a park in a grassy area where you don't have to worry about damaging your model and having lots of room to make mistakes is really, in my humble opinion, where you take it to the next step after you've done a lot of simulator work. So because of the compatibility issue, I really can't recommend this for a new pilot. unless you don't make any changes in the configuration, and just keep in mind that you need to use aux channel 4 for your flight mode selection. Then I think it's a good option for a new pilot, and just don't make any Betaflight configuration changes. With that, I greatly appreciate you all tuning into my channel.